ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Rochelle Travers, and this is The Leader. The pub, as quintessentially British as a cup of tea, queuing, or even the Queen. But could that be about to change? Pubs and brewers across the UK say they're at risk of closure within months due to price hikes upwards of 300%. Bosses of 6 of the UK's biggest pub and brewing companies have signed an open letter to the government, urging it to act in order to avoid real and serious irreversible damage to the sector. This comes after years of the pandemic having a crippling effect on hospitality as a whole. So, can the much-loved institution of the British pub survive? Molly Davis is the head of communications at the British Institute of Innkeeping.
So obviously the impact of the pandemic on our pubs was huge. We were the first to close and the last to reopen after the pandemic. So we are in a situation where they are still recovering from the impact of those 2 years of closures and restrictions on their trade. Having gone into the pandemic the sort of previous year, we were actually in growth as an industry. There'd been some closures in pubs, but where those closures were seen, pubs that were still open were employing more people, they were expanding, they were growing their businesses, and they were a hugely viable and vibrant part of a huge sector that contributes a massive amount of tax and employment to the economy. Obviously, since the pandemic, they've had an awful lot of recovery to do, and there's an awful lot of debt that they're dragging with them. The average pub is between 40 and 50 grand's worth of debt from the pandemic specifically. So where they've taken bounce back loans or those sorts of helps to get them through the pandemic phase. So they were really looking forward to this year being the first opportunity for them to grow their businesses, recover them. And we've seen a huge demand from consumers to get back out and reconnect with friends and families in their communities. But obviously the impact of the inflationary pressures that they're facing at the moment, not just through energy, but since the beginning of this year, from cost inflation in food, in drink, in transport, in pretty much every area of their business. They've been obviously massively impacted by that, but this energy crisis now has reached beyond critical point for them. The majority of our members are not immune to this. There are some people who are still in contracts that they signed prior to the sort of huge increases that we've seen this year, but 3 in 4 of our members are now heading out of those contracts, are not in contracts at the moment because they can't get them, or they have just had to sign a contract in the last few months, which has meant that they are locked into some incredible price rises across their businesses.
The BII have just done a survey looking at the impact of price increases in relation to the cost of living crisis. What did you find?
As I say, 1 in 4 members are in a situation where they're currently in a contract that's seeing them through to next year. So they have managed to minimise that impact just through sheer luck of being locked in until next year, leaving 3/4 of our members really with no certainty for their business. All that certainty means a huge amount of additional cost. Where people have been getting quotes for new contracts, 90% of our respondents are seeing at least a doubling in price from what they're currently paying for their energy bills across gas and electric, which obviously is a huge increase. But of those people, 2 in 3 are seeing price rises of over 300%, and half of those are seeing quotes at 400% or more, some as high as 500-600%. In addition to that, because obviously they were heavily impacted in the pandemic, and because they're seen as quite a fragile business to many lenders in terms of contracts, they're being denied those contracts. So they're being left on variable rates, which can be even higher than that 400 or 500%. So these are viable businesses at the heart of their communities, supporting lonely and vulnerable people, which they did throughout the pandemic, despite being not open in the vast majority of cases. They've done so much good in terms of connecting people, reconnecting them after the pandemic. And people want to go out. They want to go to the pub. They want to have a fantastic experience that they can't have at home or on Teams or Zoom. But the reality for these pubs is you can't put an extra jumper on to keep your heating bills down. You can't turn the lights off. They have to be able to be a welcoming place for people in the community. And whilst they've done a lot of great work in terms of sustainability and making sure that they are running businesses that can survive, the rates of inflation of these energy prices are just untenable. They can't possibly keep this up for the long term. So what our survey's shown is that the impact of these prices means that 1 in 2 pubs will now be loss making. So half of our nation's pubs carrying a loss forward. And if they don't have that cushion of cash in the bank, which a lot of them don't have huge cash reserves, then 1 in 3 of those businesses are telling us that they will fail in the next 3 months as they head into the quieter autumn and winter period traditionally for pubs.
Industry leaders are calling on the government to act to stop real and irreversible damage to the sector. What sort of help are you after?
Well, we work very closely with the BBPA, British Beer and Pub Association, and UK Hospitality. We did do very much so in the pandemic and since to provide a united voice to government calling for what we need. And obviously every business model is slightly different, but in the main, there are some key asks that we have for our individual members, one of which is a meaningful cap for business energy. A lot of people obviously will be feeling the pinch and much more than that as individual consumers. But for businesses, there is no energy cap. There is no upper limit on what they can pay and what they can be charged. And also, there is no way for them to reduce that energy cost, as I said before. So we're asking for a meaningful cap for business energy bills. But we're also asking for grant support now. This impact is huger in many, many cases for our members than the impact of the pandemic. At least they had furlough in pandemic, they could keep their staff safe, they had grants to be able to pay the bills that they had. They have none of that now. We're also calling for an increase of the business rate discount, which is currently at 50%, which is helpful for a lot of businesses in the sort of small to medium sector. But also there are caps on what companies can claim for in terms of the grant support. So if for anybody running more than sort of 3 or 4 pubs, they've already reached that cap. So any business rate reduction currently is not being of benefit to them. But for our individual members, we are calling for at least a 50% reduction in business rates going into 23 and 24. And then finally, we need to see a significant cut in duty for draft beer and cider of at least 20% on containers of 20 litres or more. There's so much of an impact on not just pubs and not just their employees, not just people in their local communities, but also on our brewers, small brewers who are providing fantastic, new, different, fresh beers to our pubs that people can enjoy all throughout the year, are going to be hugely impacted by this. And we stand to lose a really, really unique part of the UK.
Let's go to the ads. Stay there to hear more about whether this could be the end for our much-loved British pubs. Whilst you're here, why not give the leader a rate and follow? Welcome back. Molly, the BII works closely with pubs. What are some of the personal stories that you've been hearing?
I mean, behind the headlines, the personal stories are really quite devastating. A lot of people who run pubs in the UK live in their pubs. So they have their families, they're part and parcel of their livelihoods. It's not just a job for them. And not only will they be losing potentially their jobs, they'll be losing their entire family's income, they'll be losing their homes, and they'll be losing the communities that they live in. They may have to move very far away from them. So the impact on those individuals is huge. The impact for the communities that will lose pubs in not just sort of small villages where maybe there's only one pub, but in high streets where the only face that some more vulnerable members of our community or the lonely get to see is that friendly face behind the bar when they pop in for a drink and a chat once or twice a week. And really that impact is immeasurable. The then Chancellor Rishi Sunak has quoted us many times over the pandemic as being heart of our communities and being a vital part of the heritage of the UK. And we absolutely know that in spades, and we believe that there'll be so much lost outside of just revenue, the impact on the economy, but the long-term damage to the social fabric of the UK is going to be huge.
And obviously these pub price increases will eventually have to filter down to the customer, won't they?
Absolutely. I mean, the price increases that pub businesses have already felt over the last 6 months and even previous, they have in the main managed to keep. So that's hitting their profit lines, that's hitting their profitability. But they've tried as much as they can to shield their customers from those price rises. Some have had to put them up because otherwise, without passing on that cost increase, they wouldn't have survived even to this point. And definitely going forwards, they will have to put prices up for those who feel that they can survive with the current crisis. But in all seriousness, there will be a huge section of sort of small, really, really key pubs at the heart of their communities who won't even have the opportunity to put those prices up. And if they do, it may be that they lose customers who can't afford to spend the additional money because they're having to tighten their belts at home as well.
Do you think that the much loved institution of the British pub could be in danger?
I think you're right that it's a hugely loved part of who we are in the UK, and it's unique. You can't find a British pub anywhere else in the world. We do have that unique heritage and culture within Britain, and I do think that we stand to lose a lot of that in terms of the business failure that we're seeing without support from government. However, we are also a really tenacious and brilliantly forward-looking industry. The fight to make sure that we survive was really clear in the pandemic. People went over and above what they felt that they could do at the time and survived. And I know that spirit will see some people through. But for a lot of people, without the support that government could step in and give, it will be too little too late.
And that's it from The Leader. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.